Are you ready, Fernando?
Ready when you are, Susan.
I'm ready right now. Okay, thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our discussion with Fernando Starface, Secretary General of the Government and Foreign Affairs of the City of Buenos Aires. I want to give a special welcome to the people participating through WebEx and to all of you watching us through live stream on Twitter, YouTube channel, and our website. Now, today, we're really thrilled to be having it on all three platforms because we have the opportunity to listen to Fernando talk about the COVID-19 impact on cities and urban futures. And I know so many of us spend a lot of time thinking about what does the city of tomorrow look like post-COVID. Now, Fernando is the Secretary General of the Government and in charge of Foreign Affairs of the City of Buenos Aires since 2015. He's one of the founders and former executive director of CPEC, the top think tank in Argentina and widely recognized in Latin America. He has more than 20 years of experience, including both regional and international positions, committed to Argentine public policy. Between 2003 and 2008, he acted as governance specialist at the Inter-American Development Bank in Washington, D.C., leading projects in 14 countries across the hemisphere. Now, before we start, I also want to say how absolutely thrilled I am to be part of the Buenos Aires Consejo, which is really the Consejo Global Buenos Aires. And I want to thank Horacio Fernando and his team for inviting me to be part of it. It's really exciting. And I think there's going to be so much opportunity to really think about how to showcase Buenos Aires once we get through COVID-19. Fernando is one of the decision makers of the government of BA, and he's going to talk to us about the Buenos Aires experience navigating COVID-19 outbreak in the city. I also want to tell him how they are thinking. I also want him to tell us how they're thinking about the day after COVID-19 and what are the challenges the city has as a global city, both in the urban development aspect as well as the city's international integration. Again, thank you so much for joining us, Fernando. The floor is yours. Again, everybody, if you have a question, please let us know on WebEx chat to ASCOA programs and we'll call on you. Do not unmute your phone until such time as we do call on you, because otherwise we're going to have too much commotion. So Fernando, the floor is yours, and this is very exciting to have you with us.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you for that presentation. Usually with those presentations, you have more past and future. You have the description of the CV that you may have seen, and we are very happy to have you in the council. I also want to share with you the apologies on behalf of Juan Mendez, who is unfortunately not able to join us. He's at the moment working with the Minister of Transport of Argentina, of the federal government, and his counterpart of the province of Buenos Aires to make new actions in terms of public transportation in the metropolitan area of Buenos Aires, which I refer to it as one of the main, probably the most important challenge, geographical challenge for Argentina in this pandemic. Always a pleasure to enrich our views, exchanging some ideas in the council, and for that I want to thank you, Susan, Juan Cruz, and all the friends of the council, and of course all the colleagues and people attending this conference. Just to give you a little context, I will go through the presentation to give you a little context of where we are in the country, in the city, with COVID, and the measures we are taking, the strategy, and then to share some reflections with you in terms of the future of cities and how Buenos Aires is preparing for that new future. The presentation works. Yes. There you have Argentina in the context of some other countries. Probably the most important thing to highlight is that Buenos Aires detected its first case in March 3rd. That's our day zero. It's important to mention that a couple of days before that, -4, we launched the first press conference with the city of Buenos Aires saying that that was going to happen. We didn't know when, but that was going to happen. And that's why we have to prepare for that. There wasn't a press conference between the mayor and the health minister. Of course, this is not a competition on who said first, but the city was very aware that this was going to happen, and the mayor announced this day -4. Then it's important to mention that the federal government made a very important decision on day 16, the general lockdown or isolation, which actually came much earlier than other countries, and that made possible to control or to suppress the extension of the virus very early in the process, and to win the necessary time to prepare the health system and all other states' capacity for the next phase. From that moment, I'd like to highlight the permanent coordination between the city of Buenos Aires and the federal government and the government of the province of Buenos Aires. I know it sounds confusing for some people, but we have the federal district of Buenos Aires, where we are 3 million people sleeping every night in the city, and then you have the province of Buenos Aires, and both the city and the province of Buenos Aires belong to what we call the metropolitan area of Buenos Aires, where you have 14 million people sharing a life in that geography. And in the context, in the city of Buenos Aires, 3 additional people to 2 million regional people of Buenos Aires commuting every day. That's the main challenge for Argentina right now in terms of the proportion of cases. Regarding as the slide shows, more than 60% of the people with the virus up today are located in the metropolitan area of Buenos Aires. And as of yesterday, the total cases in the country was more than 8,000, around 400 deaths. And in the city of Buenos Aires, yesterday we had 4,130 cases and 155 deaths. This is the health panorama up to date in Argentina and in the city. The city, just to give you a general economic profile of the city, based its economic activity in 3 big clusters: the commercial one, the knowledge-based services, and the tourism. And each of the clusters has different potential, or it's affected very different by the lockdown, as you can imagine. The commercial activity is heavily affected. You cannot, up to a couple of days ago, we were not able to open the small businesses in the street, with the exception of essential type of businesses. Then you have the knowledge-based services, probably the ones with the biggest potential to adapt to this new situation. There is a study by CPEC analyzing the potential of telework for different activities in the country, and as you can imagine, the city of Buenos Aires has the biggest potential to adapt certain type of activities to this new situation. And then you have tourism. Tourism that was booming in Argentina in general, but in the city in particular. We were reaching before the pandemic historical records of tourists in Buenos Aires, coming to Buenos Aires thanks to different things. Not only that the city is beautiful, but also the more availability of flight to Argentina, thanks to the policy initiated by President Macri, the exchange rate, the coolness of the city. And this was, as you can imagine, heavily affected. It's now closed, as it happened in every other global city, and it's one of the biggest challenges for the future. How the government reacted to the pandemic. And first, I'd like to refer to the reorganization of the government. You know that we are transferring the fourth period of the same political space in the city, 2 years by former President Macri, and now we are in the second period of Mayor Larreta. And I will say that dynamics of capacity to plan the government in the long term help to increase the resilience of the government to this new situation. We reorganize the government in three main areas: crisis management, the pandemic, administration of all the other, and a special group thinking about the day after. And regarding the crisis management of the pandemic, we have the groups that presented in the slide. I don't want to go for each of them, but the strategic policy working group is at the top. I'm one of the members of that group, and we meet every day, very early in the morning, in what we call in the old-fashioned situation room, and we analyze not only sanitary data, but also economic trends, social approval of the measures and the social commitment in the measures that we are proposing. I mentioned this kind of management arrangement of the government because I think one of the keys to increase the coherent capacity of the state, not only to produce actions in the city, but also to coordinate with other jurisdictions. I think this is a very important part of the government response. And before I go to this of education and culture, I'd like to mention a very early policy that we adopted at the very beginning of the cases when we were not sure how many cases we were going to have or where they were coming from. You know that we were at the end of the summer of this year, it was March, and a lot of porteños were coming back from different places in the world, and we made this policy of isolating them, the repatriados. I don't know if they call it the word in English is repatriated, yes, in hotels. We didn't allow them to go to their houses to spend the quarantine, but we took them to hotels where they spend the 14 days, or some of them less than that. We were able to test them in hotels. And the results was a very confirming one in sanitary terms, because we were able to detect around between 5 and 10% of these people that were carrying the virus, and we know by scientific and mathematical calculus that if these people were at their houses sharing the household with other people or meeting with other people, the exponential reproduction of the virus in the city would have been much more difficult for the city. So this was a very early action taken at the beginning of the expansion of the virus that I will say it is one of the pillars of this slow or flattening curve we are living with these days. Regarding the quarantine, just to give you a couple of identity aspects of the quarantine, I'd like to mention how we adapted the educational system, very big part of our competitive advantages as a city. Again, we benefit from the previous investments in technological infrastructure and teacher training and content development in the city that made possible that when we had to rely on them, it was possible to have more than 5,000 activities and more than, now it's more, it's almost 100,000 daily users, I mean parents and children of this virtual community for the public education system to maintain certain level of content as much similar as possible to the previous normal life. I like to mention this because we usually, when we make publicity of the city outside Argentina with Susan and others, we highlight very much the educational system of Buenos Aires. We maintain that, we work with to maintain that competitive advantage even during the quarantine. I'm talking about other identity elements of the city of Buenos Aires, of course, the cultural density of the city. We usually talk about theater, the Teatro Colón and others. So the question was how we maintain that during the lockdown and the isolation. And we are very proud of the cultural platform. I'm not seeing here the address, but I promise to share with you that made possible that all the contents, the cultural programming, even the independent expression of cultural activities of the city were able to be shown in this cultural platform with huge response from the people of the city of Buenos Aires and from some other places in Argentina and the world, including more than 200 people attending Colón Theater production, something of course impossible to achieve in the normal mode. Now, going to how we are planning the day after. And before I go to that, of course, let me mention, and of course you probably know from the news, that we still haven't passed the mountain. You have these European, mostly cities, trying to come to new normal type of life after passing the mountains in terms of the presence of the virus. We are still looking ahead to that, but before that, we are starting to adapt some activities and to plan accordingly. And for that, just I'd like to mention, to share with you the way we are thinking about that day after or switch on, using two model framework that we adapted from McKinsey that tell us how to think about the reopening of the economy. On the left side of your screen, you have this conceptual way of thinking how we need to continue or how we need to walk toward the opening of the economy in a way that the speed of contagion does not compromise the capacity to attend the population. That's the mantra, that you won't see more openness in the city if we, and when I say we, the sanitary authorities and the experts of the city, think that in a way is going to compromise our health system. That's the need, and much more lower than that actually is the need. And on the right side of your screen, you have a plot that combines the proximity index of the different sectors and industries in the city with the cash resilience, if you want, of the of those sectors, and the size of the bubble is the size of the employment and the size of the economic activity, including employment of that activity. So in a way, we want to start as much as is possible. Ideally, we want to start opening those activities with a low proximity index, with a very low level of resilience in terms of cash available, and with the most impact in employment and economic activity. Of course, that's the formula of the Coca-Cola. Sometimes it's not possible to achieve, but those are the trade-offs and the dilemmas that we policymakers confront. It's a very, I wouldn't say artistic, but very specific case-by-case process. Almost 10 days ago, not the previous weekend, but not the last weekend, but the previous one, the mayor and the president announced a partial opening of the economic activity, putting the priority on small businesses in the city, comercios de cercanía, those businesses where you can, as a neighbor, you can attend by walking. And also we included some possibilities for walk in the city for family, for parents and children during the weekend. All of that organized by ID numbers and with a high level of protocol for new activities. And I will say that after the first weekend and the first week of those activities running, a partial evaluation shows that both the business people and the neighbors of the city are respecting very much the new rules. And now I'll get into the last part of the presentation, saying a few words about the future of the cities and the future of the international positions for cities. All the activities that I mentioned before that we were starting to open were joined by redesigning of the public space and the mobility options in the city to promote what people call more human-oriented, public-oriented cities with more public space for people. And that's a trend that, of course, helps a lot the isolation and the social distancing during these moments, but it's going to be again a permanent gain for the city in the future. We were already in the track of gaining more space for people in the city, and that's a trend that you can see in Buenos Aires, in Paris, in Times Square or Broadway Avenue in New York. And we took this opportunity again as a new good moment to advance this agenda. Of course, this agenda before the pandemic went hand in hand with increasing public transportation. That's what's being evaluated and redesigned right now. But in the near future, public transportation will regain that importance in the public space in the city. Now, for the last part of my intervention, I'm going to the urban debate in the world. We have two libraries. Some of the articles that you access to say that cities are part of the problem, and others say that cities are part of the solution. Some articles say that people are leaving the cities, they go to the countryside or to live in the suburbs because they don't want to be exposed to the dangers of the city. And then you have other articles saying that this is not the first time in history that cities go through a crisis like this, and in the medium run, cities have proved very resilient and adapted very successfully to this type of hazard. And what was going on actually, the common aspect of both analyses is that probably the definition of quality of life is going to change in the margin to include new elements. One of them, for example, the quality of the government of the city. In all countries, in all latitudes, government are taking a more important role in managing the pandemic and probably managing the transition to the new normal. So quality of life in cities will also depend or be a factor of the quality of the government in those cities. The focus on the new partiality is what I already mentioned, and the climate change as a great public code. I would say that we are betting that this is probably going to be the next collective action among international communities, especially in cities. The same way that the scientific community reacted very positively in terms of collaboration and cooperation to the pandemic, climate change, we think, is probably going to be the next collective goal of the city. Probably to finish, yes, how this is going to affect our international positioning strategy, of which Busan is a very important factor for that. Well, we will continue advertising the talent, the creativity, and diversity of the city. With that claim that you see in front of you in the slide, Buenos Aires as a global capital to live, study, and do business. But then we will need also to give more information and exposure to new advantages and aspects of the life in the city, which are the ones that I mentioned before, and that are presented in this slide. So with that, I'm sorry if I took too much time. I close here. I'm happy to continue the dialogue with you.
Well, thank you very much. You know what a fan we are of Buenos Aires, and I'm a fan of city living. So I'm sure that post COVID-19, cities will resurge and become very important and continue to be very important in the cultural life of a country. I feel that way about Buenos Aires. I feel that way about New York City. I feel that way about all major cities that are on a global scale around the world. But Buenos Aires, as you know, has a very special place in my heart. What do you think, right after COVID-19? I mean, people are leaving the city, but they will come back. And so I've thought a lot about how are you going to lure tourists back in the first instance? What do you think you're going to be able to say to tourists to get them to come back in the near future?
Thanks, Susan. That's a question that we try to answer every day and as soon as possible because of the economic impact and the systemic impact that I was mentioning before tourism has in the city of Buenos Aires. First, I think we will try to make very clear to the international community that Buenos Aires is a safe city. that Buenos Aires is a city safe in epidemiological terms, and that includes not only having the health infrastructure in the city to attend the pandemic, but also the social norms respected by the people of Buenos Aires, the new social norms like the use of the mask. That's an aspect that I forgot to mention, was surprisingly successful. The proposition and then obligation from the government to the people of the city to use a mask, that had never happened before in the city of Buenos Aires. We didn't have that tradition, and to be honest with all of you, we probably had the intuition that was going to be very difficult for rebel people like the Porteños to put something in our face. And I have to say that the response was very, very successful. You can walk around the street in the city and you probably won't find anyone not using the mask. So that image of people respectful of the new social distancing norm is going to be very important also to convey to the international community. Then the protocols at the hotels, at the restaurants, at all the places that make Buenos Aires famous and an attraction for people to come, will have to put in place. And for that, we will look for kind of international certification that we are meeting the highest possible standard for that. And then we were actually speculating the other day in terms of the strategy. We will try to make advantage of first international students coming back to the country. We can surely can assume that international students are the most, if you want, risk-takers people in the new normal to come. And so we will make an advantage of hosting them first and for them to convey the message to the rest of the international community that Buenos Aires is ready to receive people.
Thank you very much. You also mentioned education, and you touched on education, and I think education is particularly challenging for all cities. Not education. I mean, it's challenging for education for non-state schools, but it's particularly challenging for education in state schools because all of the digital advantages that private schools have, in many cases, you don't have for the poorer neighborhoods. What is that? How do you look at this long term in terms of, I apologize. How do you look at that long term in terms of making sure that you're going to be able to get the best education across the city? I know that's a federal issue, but it's also a city issue.
I would say it's more a city issue than a federal one because of the federal organization of the country. Of course, the federal government set the very general standards and organization of the system, but it's at the state level, and the city of Buenos Aires, as you know, is a mix of federal district and state that make the decisions in terms of the educational system. I would say that we knew that we have to adapt and modernize the educational system of the city before the pandemic. It's not that we reacted to the pandemic. But I also have to say the pandemic is accelerating a lot of trends, some of them in the element of the challenge for quality and for equality, but some of them with opportunity. And I will make a very intuitive example. We want to have the best teacher attending as much students as possible. And of course, the solution to that is to make all the teachers great. But in the meantime, that we achieve that, we have the huge opportunity of technology and virtual platforms to get and to deliver those quality features and content to all students, at least in terms of infrastructure. Of course, then you need the social context, you need the right technological infrastructure at the household, you need the conditions at the household to be the correct ones for the children to sit and to attend the class, and not idealizing the social context of every household in the city. But there you have an opportunity. Then, regarding teacher training, teacher formation, technology gives you a huge opportunity to accelerate, to make a public good of the best content, to improve the quality of the teacher and the teacher method or pedagogía, you know how to say it in English, for them to teach students. And then you have the force of the economic adaptation of the economic activities of the city to help make the case that the content of education, especially in the secondary track of the education in the city, have to adapt to. We were already working on that under the model of secundaria del futuro, secondary of the future, which was already improving the connection between the educational system and the potential of the market activities of the city of Buenos Aires. This pandemic, I think, gives you the opportunity to accelerate the case that connection has to be stronger, because you have the opportunities in front of you, and you also have the challenges of not adapting that in front of you.
Thank you very much. Could you stop sharing your screen, because otherwise all we see mostly is the screen, please?
Yeah, one moment.
Okay.
There we go.
Much better. Much better.
Yeah, much better.
So, from what I can tell from your chart and your slide, in a sense, Argentina has really, and Buenos Aires has flattened the curve. You have capacity in your hospitals, basically. When do you really think you're going to begin to open up the city in a serious way? We talk about that in New York all the time.
I know that's the big question, and I know that you don't expect me to answer in a very definite way.
Sure, I understand that.
This is a decision-making process that's impacted by the learning by doing dynamics. We are still evaluating the effects of the first opening of some activities that I was mentioning before. We still don't have the scientific evidence of that impact because of the cycle of the virus in span. We are right now exploring the day 7 or 8 after the approved those activities. I think I mentioned already that this is a very evidence-based type of government, where
Sure.
the scientific data is very important to make decisions, and we will reevaluate the data at the end of this week, after kind of 2 weeks in the first opening. What we already have, and that's a very planned model, is the way in which we would like to open the city up to someday where all the city will be back to new normal. But we don't have certain dates and moments in which we are going to adopt each phase, because that depends a lot on a number of factors. Of course, the most important one, the duplication, the number of days between the cases, and the famous R that we are still measuring.
I think one of the I think that's really critical, because I think the worst thing, we think about this a lot in the US, if you open up and then you have to shut down again, I think that's even more impactful, negatively impactful on the economy, on the city or the country or whatever. And I think that's really one of the big debates in this country. So we have a question from George Gordon at Uber. George, could you unmute your microphone and ask the question, please?
Yes. Can you hear me okay, Susan?
Yes, we can. Thank you. Perfect.
Well, thanks. And as you mentioned, I'm George Gordon. I lead our business for Uber in Latin America. So thank you, Susan, and thanks to the council and to you, Secretary Strafase, for the opportunity and for the insights. My question is, what is your view on the future of urban mobility in the new world after COVID-19? And how do you think Buenos Aires and other cities in the region could take advantage of the aggregate data and resources that technology companies like ours can provide in this moment of transformation?
Thanks, George. Are you listening okay? No.
Yes, and sorry for the background noise. That was my daughter screaming in behind me, but yeah.
Happens a lot. Thanks, George, for your question. My vision on urban mobility in the context of the pandemic is not different from the one that I had in the city had before the pandemic. We think that the city have to evolve, to give more space, as I was mentioning before, to people, to new ways of mobility, of sustainable mobility, and then bicycle lines, people walking, and all the different aspects of the public transportation system that make possible to have less and less, fewer and fewer cars in the city, and more public transportation modes in the city. Of course, we are in this specific moment. We all know that public transportation used in the same way as before is a challenge, the virus that all around, and that's why in this very specific context we are promoting more the use of other methods of transportation, including private cars. But at the same time, spatial reform that we are doing in the city signals very clear that in the new normal future that we envision, there will be more space for other sources of mobility, all of them favoring the human scale type of city.
Alec.
Yes. Hello, Fernando. How are you? Thanks for the presentation. I was reading this morning the presentation that the National Health Minister in Argentina gave on March 19th, which sounds like a long time ago, but it's a few weeks ago. And he expected in that presentation that by May the 30th, he gave two scenarios. In one of the two scenarios, and this is like 2 weeks from now, we would have 250,000 deaths. In the other one, he expected 25,000 deaths approximately, but instead we've had 200. My point is, the expectations were, depending on which metric you take, 20, 50, 100, or even 1,000 times worse, depending on whether there's cases, contagions, etc., than reality. So clearly, and this is it was actually published on the press, and it was a very detailed presentation. So my point is, given the fact that reality ended up being 99 or 98%, lower in terms of all these metrics than expected, I would have expected a very dramatic change in strategy as well, because the strategy put in place assumed those scenarios which haven't materialized. But instead, quarantine has actually kept being postponed, and there's in my view, a very, very shy approach to liberating activity. Could you comment on this, perceived contradiction, please?
Yes, of course. And first, let me thank you too, Alex, to be part of the Global Council of the City. You're a great asset for the city, and thank you for doing it.
Thank you.
I don't know specifically the report that you're mentioning, but I can follow the reasoning behind the intervention. First, I'd like to highlight and celebrate that hopefully those revisions were not improved. And we are in a moment right now in the country where, of course, we are very sorry for the deaths we have, but different levels of governments and the society were able to be very effective in stopping a catastrophic scenario. I'm not the health expert here, and I wouldn't like to comment on health sanitary strategies, but I can tell you a metaphor that you probably are all going to understand, which is the dynamics of opening the economy vis-a-vis the sanitary strategy is like the game of blackjack. You don't want to go too far, so it's late to come back and you lose. And that means the catastrophic scenario of going beyond the health capacity of your system. So far, the time that we gained by using the hammer, as Tomás Cuello will say, gave us the time actually to prepare the health system. Now is the moment to dance in Tomás Cuello's time framework with that new capacity of the health system. But the ability to open the economy in the right way so your R doesn't put you in a very difficult or compromising situation is a very tricky one. It really depends on an infinite number of factors, and of course you can have your opinion in terms of how much more you can open without compromising the system, and probably the sanitary people or the expert have others. And that's the dilemma that policymakers are confronting here and there. But here in Argentina, and especially in the city of Buenos Aires, with the fact that we haven't still left behind the mountain. The mountain is still looking in front of us. And we don't know if it's the Mount Everest or something lower than that. But it's there, and we have to respect that. And that's the dilemma for which I don't have a definite answer.
Thank you. Thank you.
Other questions from the audience? Okay, if not, I have another question. So when you think of Buenos Aires opening, you also have to think about people from outside of Buenos Aires coming, from, in fact, from other countries coming. And so what's your timeline from that perspective? So, Santiago's locked down, but eventually Santiago will open up. Eventually Brazil will open up. How do you feel, everyone's going to get restless eventually and want to travel. How do you feel about people coming from other places, even the provinces, to Buenos Aires?
There you have, yes, an issue that depends a lot on the federal view and decision for that, because of the opening of the sky, basically. Without going to the easy but too long term answer of when the vaccine is available, I will say that Buenos Aires will be ready to reopen enough in a way that is able to receive more people when we pass the peak of the pandemic. And that means sometime ahead, and I cannot say when. I wouldn't say that it will take the rest of the year, but we have still months ahead that possibility. Before that.
And Alec, you can comment on this too. Cultural institutions, how do you see the opening of physical opening of museums and galleries? And that's something, we have a gallery, as you know. Fernando and Alex knows this because he's on our advisory board. We have a gallery, and we're faced with how do we, first of all, we can't open it before the city lets us open it. But even once we open it, we have to control how many people are there. We almost have to do contact tracing should we find out someone is sick. So we have to have all kinds of preparations as we think about opening our gallery. I don't know what your view is on, because Buenos Aires is such a cultural hub.
My view is that in that front, we will benefit a lot from the experience of other cities, or New Zealand and some other European cities that are facing this challenge ahead of Buenos Aires, and that will develop certain protocols that will make possible people attending, for example, art galleries and other cultural expression. We knew right before the lockdown that probably one of the potential measures for cinemas was to locate people using one of the seats and not the next to it. And that was one of the possible protocols. I'm sure there are at the moment developing some new ones. And when I say that Buenos Aires has to signal to the rest of the world that we are meeting the highest standard, I mean that, which is putting Buenos Aires in the group of cities that are together, or the group of global cities that are together, thinking about the challenges that global cities face. And the most prominent one being having people from different places of the world attending your cities, your restaurants, your museums, and your cultural places. Buenos Aires, in the context of the pandemic, has a challenge, and we have the decision to maintain the global identity for which we advertise a lot. And for that, we need to be in the group of global cities working together.
Thank you very much. With that, I think we don't have any more questions. And so we are basically 4 minutes from our closing time anyway. So I would like to thank you very much for spending this time with us. Please send our very best to Horacio and his family, and to your family. Thank everyone on the call for joining us. And I hope you are all well and you are all safe. And we look forward to working with you on a continuing basis. I certainly miss Buenos Aires. I was going to travel there in March, except if I had traveled, I would have been quarantined. Because my travel was going to be right when you turned on the quarantine, but I had also decided I couldn't travel. And so I think this is a challenging time for everyone. And I think it's a particularly challenging time for cities. And so I think that we're all going to come out of this. We're going to learn a lot. We're going to come out of this, but hopefully we're going to come out of it as better than we entered it. And clearly for Latin America and for Argentina, in my opinion, this has put an even higher value on technology, on e-commerce, on fintech, on e-education, on everything, where Argentina was a little bit further along than some other countries in Latin America. But this has really, I think, changed the landscape of the continent forever. So thank you so much for your leadership. And again, I'm so proud to be on the advisory board with you and Alec and the rest of the advisory board, although I cannot keep up with the WhatsApp. You guys are much too quickly for me. But thank you so much again, and be well. And thanks everyone on the line for joining us.
Thanks to you, and again, thanks to the council for being such an important bridge when normal times and new normal times like this. We value very much.
Thank you.
That you gave us to be there and explain what we are doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good day, evening. Ciao, ciao.